Fame glitters like broken glass, beautiful from afar, but deadly to hold. In the city of angels, the brightest stars burn fastest, their light flickering against hotel ceilings and velvet curtains soaked in silence. They chased applause the way addicts chase breath, trading peace for pills, truth for illusion. What happens when the dream factory runs out of dreams? When the same doctors who build legends also sign their death certificates? And when the only thing louder than the crowd is the heartbeat of withdrawal behind a locked dressing room door? This is Hollywood's darkest mirror, a place where beauty and destruction share the same face. Here are 20 souls who had everything except escape. Their stories weren't written in scripts, they were written in powder, whiskey, and blood. 20. Judy Holliday. The bulb above her vanity hummed like a nervous throat, throwing a warm halo across powder and perfume. In the mirror, a perfect smile practiced itself, while a small amber bottle clicked open, one pill for courage, one for quiet. The corridor outside smelled of hairspray and anxiety. Somewhere down the hall, a stagehand rehearsed the sound of applause. The camera loved her soft light on porcelain skin, a laugh that could melt cynicism into gold. Judy Holliday was the mind behind the smile, the woman who made comedy look effortless in a world that punished women for being clever. But behind those bright eyes, Hollywood's favorite blonde genius was dissolving quietly, one prescription at a time. They said she worked too hard, that her nerves were sensitive. The doctors, the ones on the studio payroll, had a cure for that. Little white pills for morning energy, blue ones for sleep, a cocktail of calmness to keep her perfect. By the time she realized she couldn't function without them, it was too late. The laughter on set had turned hollow, the eyes in the mirror less her own. Her apartment became her sanctuary, and her cell pill bottles scattered across scripts she'd stopped reading. Friends said she smiled less, that her wit had dulled under a chemical fog. Hollywood called it exhaustion. The truth was dependency, engineered by a system that knew how to build stars, but never how to heal them. When Judy died in her early 40s, the headlines called it natural causes. There was nothing natural about it. She was the price of perfection paid in silence, another angel wrapped in satin, buried under the weight of applause. Sometimes, you can still hear her laughter spooling out of an old reel, bright as a match in the dark. In late-night cutting rooms, editors swear her timing still breathes. Her name lingers like perfume after the door closes, tender, brilliant, gone. Ninetane, Peter O'Toole. The spotlight grazed his cheekbones like a cathedral candle, tracing sweat and sorrow in the same stroke. A tumbler kissed the lip of the bar, ice cracked like a quiet confession. Outside, rain stitched silver lines across the boulevard, while a driver waited, engine idling, prayer on repeat. Let him be steady tonight. He lived like a poem that refused to end. Peter O'Toole walked through life as if every bar was a cathedral and every glass of whiskey a communion. He was brilliance wrapped in chaos, a man who could play kings and beggars with the same conviction because he carried both inside him. On screen, he burned with the kind of charm that only real pain could teach. Off screen, the bottles multiplied. He drank like he was racing death, and for decades, he was winning. Directors adjusted their schedules to his hangovers. Co-stars measured their lines against his mood. When he was sober, he was transcendent. When he wasn't, he was legend. The industry adored him because his self-destruction looked romantic. The newspapers called him the last great hellraiser, as if the word meant hero. But every toast came with a cost, his trembling hands, his fading liver, his eyes sinking deeper into themselves. By the time doctors warned him that one more binge could kill him, he simply laughed. "I've been declared dead before," he said, and meant it. He outlived the warnings, but not the ghosts. When he finally quit drinking, it wasn't redemption, it was surrender. The myth survived, the man did not. Peter O'Toole became Hollywood's favorite contradiction. Proof that genius can outshine decay, at least until the lights go out. His name still drifts through late-night bars, whispered like a warning and a wish. In projection rooms, The desert sun of an old epic flares, and you can almost see him younger, lighter, unafraid. Then the frame changes, and the legend drinks alone again, somewhere past closing time. 18. Montgomery Clift. The night of the crash still hangs in Hollywood air, screeching tires, shattered glass, a scream swallowed by silence. A streetlight blinked over the wreckage, like an unblinking eye. When they pulled him out, his face was broken, his jaw hanging loose, his beauty leaking into the dust. Someone whispered that the angels were jealous. He moved like silence, delicate, and haunted a man who could speak more with a glance than others could with monologues. Montgomery Clift was the face of feeling in an age obsessed with control. The camera adored him because he made pain look holy. But behind those soft eyes was a storm he couldn't quiet. The car crash was the beginning of his second life, the darker one. The metal crushed his face, and morphine rebuilt it. Doctors called him lucky to survive. He called it something else. Every injection dulled his agony, and every dull ache begged for more. Hollywood adjusted its angles to hide what he'd lost. He adjusted his soul to hide what he'd become. He would show up trembling, whisper his lines through a fog of pills, and still give performances so pure they broke the director's heart. The world saw artistry, his friends saw withdrawal. He called his addiction a private rehearsal for death. By the time his heart gave out, he was already gone, hollowed by painkillers, loneliness, and the unbearable knowledge that beauty fades faster when the world watches it happen. Montgomery Clift wasn't destroyed by fame, he was consumed by the silence that follows applause. On quiet nights, his films still glow faintly on forgotten screens, a face half in shadow, half in prayer. You can almost hear him breathing, steady and soft, as if rehearsing one more take for no one at all. 17. Young Michael Vincent. The propellers from the Airwolf helicopter cut through the desert air, a metallic heartbeat echoing against the horizon. Somewhere beneath the roar, Jan Michael Vincent was laughing, lines in his script blurred by hangovers and sunlight. The man in the cockpit looked like the future, young, wild, invincible, but even the sky couldn't save him. He was carved for the screen: golden hair, California grin, the embodiment of American heroism. Jan Michael Vincent didn't act. He existed in a way that made cameras chase him. In the 80s, he was television's highest-paid star, a dream projected in flight on Airwolf. But dreams don't fly forever, they fall. Cocaine was his co-star. It gave him swagger, then stole his balance. Each hit erased a line of dialogue, a memory, a piece of the man everyone wanted him to be. Studio insurance companies refused to cover him. Producers whispered his name like a curse, but they kept filming, hoping they could salvage another episode before the crash. The crashes came anyway. Cars, relationships, careers. He broke bones and promises with equal ease. The booze blurred his edges. The painkillers erased them completely. By the 2000s, he was a shadow limping through a world that had forgotten him. When death came, it didn't bother with glamour. No camera, no lights, no curtain call. Just a man who once had everything, now alone, unrecognizable and unfinished. In reruns, his helicopter still soars across the sky, defying gravity, defying time. But the man behind the machine is long gone, a ghost circling forever above the city that chewed him up. 16. Mickey Rourke. The gym lights hummed over his head, harsh and unforgiving, slicing across a body that looked more like survival than strength. Sweat hit the canvas with the rhythm of confession. Every punch was a prayer, every bruise a line of dialogue he didn't need to say. Mickey Rourke was back in the ring, but this time he wasn't fighting opponents, he was fighting ghosts. He was beauty and danger, made flesh, a man who could make tenderness look violent and violence look like love. In the smoky glow of the 1980s, Mickey Rourke was Hollywood's rebel saint, a fallen angel in leather boots. Cameras adored him because they couldn't predict him. Audiences worshipped him because they couldn't control him. But fame only sharpened his edges. The lines between performance and life blurred, and soon he wasn't pretending anymore. Cocaine became his script, whiskey his rehearsal. Each night ended in blood or silence, sometimes both. His rage made him magnetic. It also made him uninsurable. When the studios finally walked away, he turned to boxing, as if punishment might feel like purpose. The ring gave him pain, and pain gave him permission. Every blow rewrote his face, every scar another verse in his self-destruction. When his beauty faded, so did Hollywood's patience. He disappeared into motel rooms with his dogs, the only creatures that didn't expect him to perform. Then came The Wrestler, not a comeback, but a confession. The man on screen wasn't acting, he was remembering. The applause that followed was tender but tragic, like clapping for someone who'd already died. His name still hangs in locker rooms and late-night diners, whispered by young actors chasing danger. They call him a survivor, but even he knows survival isn't victory. It's just the longest round in a fight that never ends. 15. Lindsay Lohan. The flashbulbs didn't blink, they screamed. Every doorway was a trap, every red carpet an ambush. Lindsay Lohan grew up under those lights, her smile rehearsed to perfection before she could drive. The laughter, the roles, the fame, all of it polished her until there was nothing left beneath the shine. She was raised under a spotlight that never dimmed. Lindsay wasn't discovered. She was engineered, a child built for cameras, molded by applause. The Parent Trap made her a prodigy. Mean Girls made her a phenomenon. But growing up famous isn't a fairy tale. It's a slow disintegration broadcast in high definition. The same system that adored her taught her dependency. Studio doctors gave her pills to sleep, pills to wake, pills to stay thin enough for the next scene. The tabloids became her second audience, chronicling every stumble as entertainment. Rehab wasn't rescue, it was content. By her 20s, she was trapped between paparazzi flashes and court summons. Hollywood labeled her troubled, the polite word for disposable. Each attempt at redemption was framed as spectacle, a comeback that audiences tuned in for, not hoped for. Yet beneath the chaos was a woman still searching for the girl she used to be. She said once, "I just want peace," but peace doesn't trend. Even now, you can almost see her in the glare of the camera, older, quieter, holding herself steady while the crowd waits for another fall. She learned the hardest lesson of them all. In Hollywood, healing is never newsworthy. 14. Robert Mitchum. The cigarette glowed like a warning in the dark, a faint ember cutting through the fog of whiskey and perfume. In the half-light of a dressing room, Robert Mitchum leaned back in his chair, half-smile frozen, the smoke curling toward a ceiling that had seen too many secrets. He didn't believe in heaven, but he believed in hangovers. He looked like a man who'd already seen the ending, eyes half-closed, cigarette balanced between his fingers, a smirk that said nothing mattered. Robert Mitchum wasn't just an actor, he was an attitude. Hollywood called it charisma. He called it survival. In the smoke-filled world of the 1940s, he played rebels because he was one. Off-camera, the lines blurred the whiskey, the marijuana, the women who adored his indifference. When police raided a Laurel Canyon house and found him with a joint in his hand, the studio turned the scandal into legend. They repackaged his arrest as authenticity, proof that the bad boy was real. He drank like a man trying to drown time. Directors said he could finish a fifth of bourbon, wipe his mouth, and deliver a flawless scene. The camera made his ruin look graceful, but it couldn't hide the slow collapse behind his eyes. He wasn't chasing oblivion, he was rehearsing it. Hollywood rewarded him for the image it killed him with. Every role, every headline, every smirk became part of the brand, the unbreakable man. But inside, he was breaking quietly, perfectly, on schedule. The legend still flickers in black and white reruns, cigarette smoke drifting across the frame like a ghost's signature. Somewhere in that haze, Mitchum still raises his glass, the eternal outlaw, forever pretending he's fine. 13. Charlie Sheen. The city glittered beneath him, Los Angeles at midnight, humming with sirens and sin. In a penthouse bathed in neon, Charlie Sheen poured another drink, His reflection fractured in the mirror like a mosaic of past lives. The room smelled of cocaine, champagne, and expensive denial. He laughed his way through destruction, and the world laughed with him. Charlie Sheen was television's golden prince, charming, magnetic, born for the spotlight. Then he became its favorite disaster. Cocaine turned his mansion into a carnival. Porn stars, cameras, tiger blood, his meltdown became prime-time programming. Every network wanted a piece of it, every viewer a front-row seat. He turned his unraveling into a monologue and called it winning. Hollywood had seen addiction before, but never one performed like theater. Behind the chaos was a man devoured by attention. The more he burned, the brighter he trended. The same industry that paid him millions per episode now fed on his collapse. When the drugs stopped working, he replaced them with mania, a high of his own making. When he revealed his HIV diagnosis, the laughter went silent, just for a heartbeat. Then the noise returned: interviews, mockery, memes. No one ever stopped to see the man beneath the punchline. The echo of his voice still lingers in that penthouse, somewhere between arrogance and ache. His story loops like a rerun, proof that fame doesn't destroy people, it just hands them the microphone while they do it themselves. 12. Errol Flynn. The ocean outside his Malibu home whispered against the rocks, restless and unclean. Inside, the curtains were drawn tight, bottles on the piano, a half-lit cigarette trembling in an ashtray. Errol Flynn's laughter still filled the room, but it was the laughter of a man trying to outrun silence. The party never stopped because stopping meant remembering. He was the original adventure, the man who made heroism look seductive, danger look noble. Errol Flynn didn't need costumes or scripts. The myth of him was already written in his smirk. He was golden, unstoppable, and doomed from the start. Behind the laughter, there was always the needle. Flynn's body was a map of old wounds, patched together with morphine, cocaine, and denial. Studio doctors called it management. The truth was maintenance, a chemical leash disguised as treatment. He'd shoot up between takes, then charm his way through a scene as if pain couldn't touch him. Warner Brothers knew. Everyone knew. They sent private physicians to his sets, fed the tabloids fairy tales about vitamins and exhaustion. Hollywood couldn't afford to lose its favorite rogue, so it propped him up with drugs that would kill him slower than the truth. By the time he hit 50, his heart was a battlefield. The autopsy said his organs were twice their age. His legend stayed perfect. Only the man decayed. The reels still play, the hero still swings his sword, the music still swells, but if you look closely, you can see the tremor in his hands. That's not acting. That's the moment the dream begins to crack. 11. Richard Pryor. The smell of burnt plastic lingered in the air that night, the aftermath of a miracle and a confession. Richard Pryor had run down the street engulfed in flames, his body a torch and a testimony. In the hospital, he joked through the pain, turning horror into punchlines. Laughter was his language, even when it was the sound of survival. He turned pain into punchlines and tragedy into laughter. Richard Pryor didn't just make people laugh, he made them understand. He dragged addiction onto the stage and stripped it of shame, even as it stripped him of his body. Cocaine was his shadow. It followed him from backstage to bedrooms, from late-night genius to early-morning terror. In the 80s, he lit himself on fire while freebasing, running down a Los Angeles street, a man literally burning alive. The tabloids called it madness. He called it honesty. When you're on fire, he told his audience later, people get out of your way. I need trill. The joke was brilliance. The truth was unbearable. Even after surviving the flames, he couldn't escape the smoke. The drugs stayed, and the pain deepened. He knew what was happening, and he kept telling us, one punchline at a time. By the end, his body was failing. Multiple sclerosis took what cocaine hadn't. He performed sitting down, trembling, still chasing that dangerous connection between agony and applause. His voice still echoes in comedy clubs, raw and unfiltered, a reminder that truth can burn and still be beautiful. Somewhere in the laughter, His pain lingers an ember that refuses to die. 10. John Barrymore. A decanter glimmered beside the script he would never finish. The hotel suite smelled of dust and gin, and the faint echo of applause haunted the wallpaper. John Barrymore sat by the window, eyes glassy, voice slurred but still royal. He had once conquered Broadway, then Hollywood, and now only the bottle obeyed him. He was born into legend, the great profile, the man whose face defined an era. John Barrymore didn't just act, he embodied elegance, wit, and the illusion that talent could outrun time. But the mirror has always been Hollywood's cruelest co-star, and eventually, it showed him what the crowd refused to see. The liquor started as celebration, then became ritual. He hid bottles in props, in books, in the walls of his dressing room. On screen, he played the aristocrat, the genius, the fallen man, all versions of himself. Studios knew he was collapsing. They kept filming. The trembling hands, the slurred lines, the half-smiles. They said it was method acting. It wasn't. It was disintegration captured on celluloid. He became a spectacle in slow motion, a once great artist turned cautionary sideshow. The laughter from audiences was crueler now. They were watching his body decay in real time, mistaking suffering for performance. By the time he died, Barrymore's glory had been auctioned for irony. The industry that once worshipped him now used him as a punchline proof that even gods can drown in gin. The glow of his old films still flickers on forgotten screens, his voice echoing from another world. In the pauses between dialogue, you can almost hear him breathe, not as an actor, but as a man begging for one more curtain call. 9. Robert Downey Jr. The iron clink of handcuffs echoed louder than applause. Cameras flashed as Robert Downey Jr. was led into court, a fallen prince of Hollywood, his brilliance dimmed by exhaustion and drugs. His eyes, still sharp, flickered with that familiar spark, the defiance of a man who'd already lived 1,000 endings. He was born under the lights, raised on chaos, destined for brilliance. Robert Downey Jr. had talent so natural it looked unfair, and demons so old they felt inherited. The son of a filmmaker who shared his addictions, he never stood a chance at normal. Drugs weren't rebellion, they were routine. Cocaine for energy, heroin for peace, fame for distraction. He filmed masterpieces by day and spiraled through hotel rooms by night, waking up in strangers' houses with no memory of how he got there. Arrests blurred into headlines, headlines into punchlines. He was Hollywood's prodigy turned pariah. And yet, even at his lowest, the spark refused to die. The world saw a mugshot. Directors saw potential. After prison, after rehab, after being written off entirely, he clawed his way back. Iron Man wasn't just a movie, it was resurrection. A junkie reborn as a savior, a man playing himself in armor. But recovery isn't redemption. It's endurance. Downey rebuilt his empire, but the ghosts never fully left. He learned how to coexist with them, not to conquer, but to contain. Sometimes, during interviews, his voice trembles on certain words, as if they still taste of powder and fear. The armor may shine, but the man inside still remembers the cold metal of the cell door closing behind him. 8. Elizabeth Taylor. The lights of the Beverly Hills Hotel shimmered against her diamond necklace as she stared into her champagne glass, watching the bubbles rise and vanish. Around her, laughter roared, camera flashes bloomed like small explosions, and the air smelled of roses and whiskey. Elizabeth Taylor had perfected the art of appearing invincible, a goddess built from lavender light and scandal. She glowed like a goddess sculpted from diamonds, violet eyes, impossible grace, a face that could quiet a room. Elizabeth Taylor was Hollywood incarnate, the beauty, the chaos, the illusion of control. But under the gowns and jewels was a woman in pain, trapped in a body that betrayed her and an industry that refused to let her rest. The pills began as medicine, back surgeries, migraines, sleepless nights. The prescriptions piled up until they became part of her identity. Doctors fed her addiction in the name of performance. Studio handlers called it maintenance. She called it the only way to keep moving. By the 70s, she was drowning behind the glamour. Vodka blurred the nights. Painkillers dulled the days. The tabloids mocked her for gaining weight, for losing control, for being human. But Elizabeth did something no one expected. She broke the silence. She walked through the doors of the Betty Ford Center and let the cameras capture her vulnerability. Her public confession shattered Hollywood's hypocrisy. For the first time, addiction had a famous face that refused to hide. When she emerged, she was no longer a fallen star, she was a survivor. To this day, her eyes still stare back from perfume ads and movie posters, a haunting reminder of strength carved out of suffering. Somewhere between the diamonds and the darkness, Elizabeth Taylor proved that even a goddess can choose to be human. 7. River Phoenix. The air outside the Viper Room was thick with cigarette smoke and Halloween static. A crowd pressed against the velvet rope, unaware that a legend was collapsing just a few feet away. The neon sign flickered red against the pavement as River Phoenix convulsed, his sister crying, his brother screaming for help. The city of dreams had just claimed its youngest prophet. He was supposed to be the future, the actor who would bring soul back to stardom. River Phoenix had purity written all over him. Vegan, spiritual, soft-spoken. He was the anti-Hollywood ideal, until the dream swallowed him too. He started experimenting while filming My Own Private Idaho, trying to understand the world his character inhabited. The drugs stayed long after the cameras stopped. He told himself it was research, then control, then escape. By 23, the boy who preached clean living was collapsing under the weight of his own contradictions. Outside the Viper Room, under the neon hum of Halloween night, the illusion ended. River's body hit the pavement, convulsing in front of his brother Joaquin and sister Rain. Cocaine and heroin mixed in his blood like poison poetry. The crowd kept dancing inside. The cameras kept rolling somewhere else. The media mourned him, but only briefly. They turned him into another symbol, the beautiful boy who flew too close to fame. His name became shorthand for wasted potential, a warning wrapped in innocence. Sometimes, when you pass that club on Sunset Boulevard, you can almost see him young, laughing, guitar on his back. For a moment, you believe he made it home. Then the light changes, and he's gone again, back into the myth that never let him live. 6. Marilyn Monroe. The flashbulbs never stopped. Even when she blinked, their afterimage lived behind her eyelids, bursts of white heat that turned her world into permanent daylight. In her dressing room, the mirror multiplied her face a dozen times, each reflection smiling differently, each one a little more tired. A half-empty glass of champagne sweated beside a handful of pills that glimmered like pearls. Her smile was a weapon, soft, dazzling, and designed to hide the war inside. Marilyn Monroe was the dream America sold to itself, perfection in silk, fragility mistaken for charm. But no one told her that being a fantasy means never being allowed to rest. The pills began as help, a way to keep the exhaustion quiet, the weight down, the performance steady. Studio doctors played God, mixing barbiturates and amphetamines like paint on a palette. Each pill had a purpose, one for sleep, one for control, one for silence. They didn't cure her, they created her. Off camera, her laughter slowed into tremors. She'd stare into mirrors, rehearsing joy she no longer felt. When she missed shoots, the tabloids called her unstable. The studio called her ungrateful. Neither called her what she really was, a woman systematically undone by the machine that made her. In the end, she died alone in a locked room, surrounded by the tools of her transformation. The world called it tragedy. Hollywood called it branding. Sometimes when the old reels play, and she turns her head just before the camera fades, it feels like she's trying to tell you something, that the glow was never worth the heat. But by then, the picture has already moved on. 5. Whitney Houston. The stage lights hit her face like sunrise. The crowd roared, a sea of devotion, and Whitney Houston raised her arms like a preacher at the altar. For a few perfect minutes, she was untouchable, the voice of God in human form. But when the music ended, The silence was unbearable. Her voice could raise the dead, a cathedral of sound that made the world believe in miracles. Whitney Houston was light incarnate, and the world wanted more of it than she could ever give. Every note was flawless, every day was pressure. The expectations crushed her before the drugs did. Cocaine offered escape, a high that mimicked the applause. It became her quiet companion, whispering peace while erasing everything else. When she fell in love with Bobby Brown, the headlines turned her marriage into theater and her addiction into a spectacle. The cameras never looked away. Each comeback was a resurrection and a relapse. Her voice cracked, her body trembled, but she kept singing for the money, for the myth, for the mercy of an audience that loved her pain. The woman behind the voice was already disappearing. In 2012, they found her submerged in a Beverly Hills bathtub, cocaine in her bloodstream, fame in her lungs. The world called it a shock. It wasn't. It was prophecy fulfilled. Her songs still echo from hotel radios and wedding halls, a bittersweet hymn to beauty undone by expectation. Each note rises like a ghost, reminding us that perfection is the cruelest prison of all. 4. Heath Ledger. The city outside his apartment was still asleep, but his mind wasn't. Empty coffee cups lined the windowsill. The faint hum of a camera left on standby filled the room, and the script for The Dark Knight lay open beside a bottle of sleeping pills. The role that would make him immortal was already stealing his sleep, his peace, his sense of self. Heath Ledger carried storms behind his eyes, soft-spoken, magnetic, already half someplace else. He wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing truth, and truth in Hollywood is a dangerous addiction of its own. Every role demanded more of him. Every script carved another piece away. Sleep eluded him. Thoughts raced faster than his body could follow. Prescription bottles became his lullaby, a chemical orchestra meant to quiet his genius. He swallowed what the doctors prescribed, then what silence required. The Dark Knight changed everything, and ended everything. To become the Joker, he stopped pretending there was a line between art and madness. He studied the void until it looked back. Friends said he laughed less, that his energy felt heavier. He was exhausted not from work, but from existing. When he died in his Manhattan apartment, surrounded by the same pills meant to help him rest, the world called it accidental, but it wasn't. It was the inevitable end of a man who gave too much of himself to make fiction feel real. Sometimes, when you watch that film again, when the Joker tilts his head and whispers about chaos, you can almost hear the man beneath the makeup whispering back, asking if the performance was worth the price. 3. Philip Seymour Hoffman. The door to his New York apartment was ajar when they found him. A half-filled notebook sat on the table, next to a syringe and the script of a play he would never perform. Outside, snow fell soundlessly over the city. He loved a white sheet for a man who'd spent his life exposing truth in the darkest corners. He never looked like a star, and that's what made him unforgettable. Philip Seymour Hoffman was the truth in a room full of illusions, the kind of actor who made pain look holy. But his honesty came with a price, and the needle was always waiting to collect. He had beaten heroin once, stayed clean for decades, built a family, won an Oscar, became a monument to control. Then the old ghosts returned, whispering that one taste wouldn't hurt. One became two. Two became routine. Soon, his apartment was filled with little plastic bags, as if he'd been saving evidence against himself. On stage and screen, he was transcendent, subtle, human, devastating. Off stage, he was unraveling quietly, missing rehearsals, avoiding calls, lost in the haze he thought he'd escaped. The morning they found him, the syringe was still in his arm. Hollywood called it tragedy. The papers called it relapse. Neither word captured the truth. He didn't die from heroin. He died from loneliness disguised as control. Even now, when you watch him speak a flicker of vulnerability in every line, it feels like he's still here, whispering a final monologue about the cost of feeling everything too deeply. 2. Judy Garland. The bulbs around her mirror buzzed faintly, casting halos of white light on trembling hands. In her dressing room, Sequins sparkled like armor, and the scent of powder and barbiturates clung to the air. A script lay open beside a cup of cold coffee, and Judy Garland whispered to herself, not lines from The Wizard of Oz, but words she wished someone would say to her, "You can rest now." She was the girl who sang her way into eternity, ruby slippers, a trembling smile, a voice that could melt even the cruelest heart. But behind the Technicolor fantasy, Judy Garland lived inside a nightmare that began before she was old enough to understand what fame meant. MGM wanted perfection. They saw her not as a child, but as a product. Too round, amphetamines, too tired, barbiturates, too emotional, silence her. Every pill came with a promise: more energy, more focus, more control. What they didn't tell her was that the medicine would outlive her childhood. By the time The Wizard of Oz made her immortal, Judy was already enslaved to the system that built her. She performed through exhaustion, laughed through panic, and cried into her dressing room walls. When she stumbled, the press called her unstable. When she collapsed, the studio called her replaceable. She fought for decades through comebacks, overdoses, marriages, and heartbreaks, still chasing the applause that had started her addiction. When she died in a London bathroom, just 47 years old, her body finally escaped what her soul never could. Sometimes, when her song drifts through old radios, somewhere over the rainbow, it sounds less like hope and more like haunting. The child the world adored never found her way home, and maybe that's the cruelest magic of all. 1. Corey Haim. The sun had barely risen when the news broke. Corey Haim, the eternal boy of the 80s, was gone. The apartment was small, quiet, littered with pill bottles and faded VHS tapes, echoes of a childhood he never escaped. On a dusty shelf sat The Lost Boys, his grin frozen in time, untouched by the years that took everything else. He was innocence, personified, a teenage grin, wild eyes, and the reckless joy of youth bottled for the camera. Corey Haim wasn't meant to fall. He was meant to fly. The Lost Boys turned him into a symbol of cool rebellion, the kid who could outrun the darkness. But in Hollywood, the darkness always catches up. The pills came before the adulthood did. Producers called him energetic, then unfocused, then troubled. They fed him drugs to keep him manageable, to keep him bankable. By 16, he was both millionaire and addict, adored by millions and protected by no one. Cocaine became his comfort. Valium became his lullaby. When the roles dried up, he chased nostalgia instead of sobriety, appearing at conventions with hollow eyes and shaky smiles. Hollywood had moved on, but addiction never does. In the end, he died quietly, pneumonia, they said. But everyone knew better. His body was too worn, too poisoned, too tired to keep pretending. The boy who once symbolized youth became a ghost before he reached 40. At fan conventions, they still sell his autograph. His smile, his face, his forever 16. In a way, he finally got what Hollywood always promised: to never grow old, no matter the cost. The lights go out one by one, vanity bulbs, theater spotlights, the glow of projectors fading into static. In the silence that follows, you can almost hear them breathing, the stars, the junkies, the dreamers, caught somewhere between applause and oblivion. Hollywood was never heaven. It was a mirage built on desperate hope and dangerous chemistry. The studios prescribed pills instead of compassion, silence instead of rescue. Every overdose was a sequel, every relapse a rewrite. The faces changed, but the pattern didn't. Addiction wasn't the disease, it was the design. The system fed on beauty, burned it bright, and called the ashes legacy. These weren't weak people. They were the strongest of their generation, crushed under the weight of the spotlight. Their names still flicker on screens, their laughter trapped in reels, their voices echoing from a past that refuses to die. And maybe that's the real curse of fame: immortality without peace. So the next time the credits roll and you whisper, "They were so beautiful, remember?" They still are, just not here.